Welcome, everybody, to the launch of Common Ground, A Critical Reader. I'm Kieran Long, David's assistant for the Biennale, and the book is something we're very proud of, and we did in parallel with the exhibition. So this is an important moment for us to mark that. So thanks for coming. Ricky Burnett, himself a former director of the Biennale, is here to moderate a very short discussion, and we have some of the writers here who may chip in at some point. But I'd like to hand over to Ricky.
Thank you very much, and great to see everybody here on this beautiful day. And of course, the emotions run high, and I empathize with David's feeling and Kieran's feelings today, but he's looking far more relaxed, I have to say, than even yesterday. And I think that's important, and it's important to mark the fact that there's an extraordinary achievement to be able to do an exhibition of this scale, the largest in the world, in actually a very short period of time, but also to produce an extra bonus in this case, which is this beautiful book, which I've just held in my hand and I had an occasion to scan over the last few days as a PDF on the computer, which is nothing as sensuous and as exciting as this document here. And I want to just start by applauding the maker of the book, John Morgan, who, not just the publisher, the maker of the book. And I think it's too easy in these days to forget that actually communication is about not just the beauty of the word and the image, but the beauty of the thing you hold and the way you communicate.
I think that there's been an emphasis in the last 20 years on the singular piece of architecture. I think that we have seen some, exemplary buildings. I mean, I would say it's been a very exciting period for architecture in a sense. I mean, we've seen a lot of innovation, we've seen a lot of experimentation, but there's a sense that, if you read the media, you would think that architecture is only in the hands of a few stars. And I'm not knocking, everyone said, oh, this is the end of the star system. Of course it's not. I mean, you need protagonists. I mean, there have always been singular protagonists. There always will be singular. We need singular protagonists. It's not. But the danger of this suggestion is that there is no such thing as architectural culture, that there is no architectural discipline. It's only down to the performance of single genius. We're fortunate to know many of those singular genius, and I would argue that they do have their feet within, a large and wide architectural culture. We don't talk about it very much, and the professional predicament tends not to encourage us to talk about it. And the professional predicament tends to push us the other way, is to identify yourself different to others. Why should we hire this guy or this woman instead of this one? So even the professional predicament tends to push architects apart. The danger of Biennale, if you asked 50 architects to come and present their work in a Biennale, you're in danger of only furthering that myth. I think that there is an architectural culture. I'm fortunate enough to spend time with other architects who would be called stars, the Herzogs and the Zahas. And, late at night in a bar in Madrid after 2 whiskeys, you talk very deeply about your subject. So if you can do it in a bar in Madrid, why can't we do it in the...
You stress in your piece the notion of collaboration. So you stress in your piece the notion of how important collaboration is. And then you have a sort of throwaway sentence, which if I remember, says, but good architecture requires conspiracy, which is a form of collaboration, but it's also, in many ways, exclusionary. It's quite secretive. So explain that to us. You did say that.
Yeah.
I'm not inventing it.
Architecture is probably the most collaborative process there can be in peacetime. If you line up everybody at the end of a project who's worked on a project, it's enormous. The professional predicament often puts a lot of those people in direct opposition to each other. And therefore, you sit, the first day you sit down on a project, you're at a big table and you're trying to work out, who the enemy and who might be on your side. And all architects would tell you, absolutely to a person, that good projects come out of good collaborations. You know, when the client and the contractor, and when you can diffuse that confrontation. Now, what's interesting about the concept of common ground, as explained to us in a room by Richard Sennett some months ago, was that this was not the abandonment of positions. It was not that the project manager shouldn't have to perform as a project manager and that the contractor shouldn't intrinsically perform as a contractor or whatever, but that their positions, without surrendering their positions, they could at least work towards common ideas.
Well, I think the book. Oh Christ! The book was certainly something that we spoke about from the very beginning, partly as a response to the way that the Biennale does publishing, and a desire to leave a kind of legacy intellectually.
Do you want to say a bit more about that?
No, I don't really want to say too much more about that, except to say that I must pay you a compliment to say that the last Biennale catalogue that I really enjoyed was yours, because it had new writing in it, and we felt that there's a place for new writing, as well as the new work that you see in the show, and the kind of literary dimension of architecture, its recording in history through drawings and through writing, was something that many of the people in the show stand for very strongly, and so a book was a fairly natural consequence. And the way it's structured does respond, as you say, to these themes. There's clearly something about the intellectual common ground, what we call the intellectual commons. It's the first section of the book, with people like Joseph Rickvert writing exactly about what is that common ground professionally. And then at the end, you have this question that David is very concerned with about architecture's communication with the public. But then I think there are also things in it, in those sections, which perhaps wouldn't play out that well as an exhibition, but are necessary parts of the conversation. In the conflicted ground section, we have questions of the destruction of monuments during wartime, the use of architecture as evidence in criminal trials. These kinds of things may be a little hard to stomach as an exhibition, but as an essay, they're really compelling. So it's an important, I think, outlet for some thinking in the culture that maybe wouldn't make an exhibition.
And so are all the authors actually in some way or other involved in one of the exhibitions or not?
No.
And how did you choose them?
Yeah, so there are two halves. One first tranche of writers were really invited exactly as the participants in the exhibition were. They were given the same text. We provoked them with the same, with the theme in the same way, and we really asked them to respond to it. And the responses from most of the writers and academics and historians in the book are mainly that. And then we added some shorter pieces of writing by many of the contributors to the exhibition, Chino Zucchi, who's here, Fulvio Arace, others, where we felt there was something to unlock, really, something further, some further historical message, some further philosophical message that may provide a background to the exhibition.
So, I mean, my interpretation of the issue of common ground, which was suggested by David, was influenced by the previous title he had chosen for the exhibition, which you mentioned before, which was on continuity, which attracted me very much because it's, on my belief, it's one of the main themes that Italian architecture, especially in the past century and the after-war period, has got to face with. There is a sort of similarity. There was a situation of crisis, of distraction, the necessity of starting again to create a new identity. And the Milan was chosen by me as a case study of this opportunity of giving architecture a new chance of defining a social context. So the idea is that, which you can see in the Face City exhibition, is that the role of the architects was not only an aesthetic role, a professional role, but was the role of an architect very much engaged on the field of influencing social behaviors, for the new classes that were emerging. So the funny thing is that I somehow reversed the idea of common ground connected to the ground, which I proposed the common ground was a vertical common ground, which was the issue of the facade of the buildings, like a sort of dress that should give impulse to people to behave in a certain civil manner.
David, do you want to?
I want to be very brief. Yes.
No, that's perfect. David, do you want to, in a way, respond to that? I mean, if you were to, transmigrate yourself into London in the early part of the 20th century, as opposed to.
Yes, I would just like to add one very short thing, that when I first spoke to David about that, he said, yes, I love those old masters, those old Italian masters. He doesn't love the new ones, maybe, but he used to love the old masters. And I started to think, getting into his architecture and thoughts, there must be a sort of continuity between his position at the moment and the position that was held by Rogers or Franco Albini and the other guys, which I think that the answer is getting now to his architecture. Somehow it appears to me as very strong roots in Italian architecture from that period. I don't know whether you agree or not with that.
Well, you know it's true, so it's.
But share with us what your feelings are about that. And why those references?
Well, I think that period is an extraordinary period, and it was this idea of continuity, as phrased by Ernesto Rogers, and this extraordinary period of Italian architecture, 1950s, 1960s, which was dealing with both, trauma, optimism, looking backwards, going forwards. It's a most sophisticated moment in architectural history, I think, in Europe. I mean, it's an extraordinary moment. And I think there are some profound lessons there about how we deal. Now, the problem is that, the clock is speeding up in such a way that we don't know quite anymore how to hold on to things. So we have a very difficult relationship, I think, with, what came before us. But just to draw some circles. It's very nice. There's an essay in the book by Raphael Moneo, coming from completely different, well, not completely different, but had no clue about this, talking about a sort of debate I had with him about what he should put in the Biennale, because I wanted Raphael to talk about building in the city, because that's his subject. And he does a nice little essay saying, my whole idea is a little bit about how I was going to write about this change, because I was in Milan and looking at the work of certain architects, and I realized that architects build cities, which in a way we always say the other way around, in a way cities, but he was really saying there was a moment in Milan where, because we keep talking about the protagonist, a lot of people have asked me, so what you want to do is to sort of suppress the identity of the author. Completely not. Absolutely not. The author, the protagonist, is absolutely a strong vehicle to make things happen. But it was a very nice essay where Moneo says, I was in Milan and it really hadn't hit me so much how much a city can be made by architects, which is a sort of contradiction to other ways that we might read the city.
David, in what you've just said, there could be a sort of tinge of criticism of what the world is like out there, which I think actually is not what you're saying. And from what I've seen of the show, and certainly what I've been able to hear from others, there's a sort of sense coming through this massive exhibition with 100 architects doing different things in different parts of the world, of a sort of repositioning and being just more modest about asking some big questions that Mark was talking about. Let's talk about it. And you use this phrase, which in your text, which is the symbolic potential of architecture makes us uncomfortable. I think that's an interesting thing to say at the beginning of the 21st century. We wouldn't have said that in the 1990s or the 1980s. And then you say functionality is no longer an excuse for form, which in a way, but we therefore need to grasp something else, which is to do about the common ground of culture, of ethics, and physicality. And that struck me as a very positive note. David and I always play this game a little bit that I feel he's always down, and you hear him give a speech, and you say, well, I want to not practice as an architect. I think it's a very, very different feel, and I want to give you that last word to confirm to us why you feel this is a positive shift in terms of how the practice of architecture is played out across the world.
Well, I think in the Biennale we were very cautious about not trying to be didactic in any way. We were very self-conscious about not trying to give answers, but I think I agree completely with Mark. I think we had the opportunity to ask questions, and we could juxtapose things, and I just wanted to give voice. I wanted to give validity to those voices, and I wanted to get those voices out of their normal autobiographical presentation, because I think the autobiographical presentation of someone just showing us their last concert hall with immaculate drawings and immaculate models just means that we gloss over them, literally. And therefore, I wanted everyone just to lift up the lid of the bonnet and just show us a bit more into their thinking, and then maybe that would allow a more honest dialogue. But we certainly, of course, the problem about doing a show is you leave people out, you put people in. I mean, you're making strange decisions sometimes. Some of them are, very prosaic reasons. But we did try and tinker. We did try and sort of say, well, we've got none of that. Shouldn't that voice be somewhere? We looked for that. And we did try to bring some of these questions that were there. There is an agenda there. I'm not pretending there's not. Underlying that we are trying to ask those questions about what our cities should look like. There's a very nice presentation, I think, filmed by Robert McKillop, that we commissioned, in fact, of the Shard. Because for me, the Shard is a sort of strange thing.
The Shard is Renzo Piano's very tall building in London.
The tallest building in Europe has now just been completed in London, and we don't quite know what to do with it. We don't quite know what to think of it. We thought we were going to hate it. A lot of people do, and yet it's there, and it's our skyline. And next, then we got Fiona Scott. Well, in fact, it started the other way. Fiona Scott had done really beautiful drawings of Borough High Street, showing what is on the ground. And we put these two things together because it seemed to me that we're stuck with these two predicaments. If you go to Qatar now, you will find a city. It happened, between trips, as far as I was concerned. Last time I went, it wasn't, and this time there's a city. You drive towards something that looks like a city. It's got a skyline. If you've got a skyline, you've got a city. Except when you get there, there isn't a city. But these things are part of our reality. And in London, we have a Shard, and it sits in a medieval townscape. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't have Shards, or you should do, but these are predicaments that we've been put in. And we ought to have slightly sharper tools to be able to talk about this, and as architects, we don't.
I mean, one of the essays by Teresa Stoppani talks a lot about the importance of effectively architecture itself being a critical art, and harking back, of course, to Aldo Rossi, who we should also remember in this particular venue as such an important player. But I think, David, Kieran, you are to be congratulated, John Morgan again, and all the authors for doing one thing.
And Shumi Bose as well, who is a co-editor of the...
Shumi, I'm sorry, I forgot. Shumi, thank you very much for your important role in this. I want to thank all of them for playing this very important role that we can take away with us after this event closes in November, and begin to go back to some of those questions, to go back to some of the conversation which has been going on, as Mark has already alluded to, maybe for centuries, and will certainly continue, and actually in a reinvigorated way as a result of this debate. Mark, I want to end with one other point you made, because it just made me smile, and I think it's also very true. What David and Kieran and others have done here is to actually force a dialogue between live architects. Right? And he makes a point, and this is where I just want to add, is that yes, there's this sort of permanent conversation amongst designers and others. It's also a permanent competition between them. Ultimately, it is. And point is made that actually dead designers play a very active role in this debate. Luckily, not only dead ones, but also live ones. Thank you all for taking part, and enjoy the show.